Good evening, everyone. My name is Sofia Moreno. This is for the second task of the course Translation Techniques. And right now, I'm going to share with you my summarize about like the chapter 5, that was the one that I chose. So in this chapter, the author John Cunnison Catford talks about like his theories and his problems too, or not problems but issues. One issue that Catford mentioned is that the language lacks of substance when it comes to sounds. So sounds are not just like random noises, but they make the language work. Without the phonemes, the phonological like units will not make sense. So to make it like more clear or like to conclude, Clatford like separates sounds from how they are used in the language, but phonetics is like still the part of the linguistic. Another issue that Clatford theory is that like it just focuses on formal structure of the language, but not completely ignores the meaning of the language. Translation is about to understand and sharing the meaning to one language to another one. But in this case, like class 4 also compare linguistics and language. And this theory or this issue can be a little bit confusing to understand because the two theories doesn't fit that well, don't fit together. He thinks that translation fits in linguistics, but this idea is not that very clear in this chapter. This theory will have problems because translation is not about just comparing languages. It is also about using one specific language to communicate between languages in different cultural settings. There are different types of translations and theories, but translation doesn't have to be literally translated word by word. But in this case, Catford defines translation as changing information from one language to another language in a very textual way. He specifically talks about the total translation, meaning that all the parts of the text are translated word by word. But also sometimes he mentioned that he might be using the restricted translation, where only certain or the most important parts of the text are translated. In conclusion, Catford's theory can be very confusing and can have several challenges, particularly with his idea of translation as a replacing material from one language to another. And now, moving to the other chapter that I choose, the number 9, procedures, we will talk about the different ideas that Walter Benjamin, Vladimir Nabokov, and G.D. Levy have about translation. So first we are going to talk about Benjamin. In this chapter, different authors talk about the task of the translator. Benjamin starts talking about the translation between the translation and the original message. He mentions that translations should have an objective to communicate the meaning of the original information, but rather in essence. So he's like the opposite to the previous author that we were talking about like a few minutes ago. For Benjamin, translators should prioritize communication. He actually criticized and judged the translators that have really bad ways to translate because they lack of essence and they literally replace just the original meaning. These types of like bad translation doesn't have any type of like relationship with the communication, the culture, and it doesn't create a deeper connection between the languages. On the other hand, we have the writer Nabokov. He talked about the difficulties of translating. He specifically talked about the issue he faced while he works in his different novels because he's a writer. He believed that the literal translation is more useful for him. He's more faithful to the original text. He likes to stay with the original text and translate it word by word than to provide a translation with just communication and not literal translation. He also mentions that when he tried to translate his novels or as a writer, he highlights the importance of taking notes so readers can understand the difficulties of the original text better. And then we have Levi, the third author. He studied literary translation, and in his most important work, The Art of Translation, he talked about how translations work and the possible problems that most of the translator will face. He shared that translation is not just about changing and translating every word, but also include a style and a meaning of the original text. He divided his work into two parts. The first part, he talked about the translation theories, the challenges, and then the second part, he talked about the focus on the translation and the practical issues. Levi mentioned that he didn't like the traditional ways that some translators do regarding translation. He mentioned that translation should be an art, that each person will have, language skills, but also their own creativity to translate the original message. He also thinks that translation can be different in different areas, and he actually talks about how in the Western Europe translation is very different than the Eastern translation. In the Western Europe, translation was more about rules, while in the Eastern Europe, they focus more about translating literary. His work has helped us to understand translation better, and it has shown us that translation, it doesn't have to be that structured or that strict. He shows us that translation is more about culture, style, and creativity. This was my review, my summarize about the two chapters that I chose. I hope it was understandable for everyone. Thank you.